Paddington 1, that is the first live-action Paddington Bear movie based on the Paddington Bear books, is better than the sequel. In this video, I'm going to cover the story, plot, villains, stakes, and a few other bits and bobs about why I think the original Paddington is better than Paddington 2. Right off the bat, let me be clear. Both films are great. They're both very fun and enjoyable for the whole family, and this isn't art house cinema we're talking about here. But the popular opinion I've heard is that Paddington 2 is better, and I just want to throw my thoughts into the mix and let it be known that, actually, Paddington 1 is better. So I've only gotten around to watching these films recently, and what I did is I watched one film per day over 2 days. Now, let me just say, I wasn't sure what to expect going into Paddington, but it was a good time. It was whimsical and fun, predictable, sure, but it's a family film. You should know what you're signing up for. Having finished the first film, going into the second day, I was genuinely excited and looking forward to watching the sequel. And well, it's good, it's a good film, and it was still enjoyable. But, like I said, it wasn't better than the first. And here's why. Spoiler warning. Paddington 1. After a devastating earthquake shakes up his life, a young, marmalade-loving, anthropomorphic bear must travel to London in search of a new home and family, leaving behind the only place he's ever known in the jungles of darkest Peru. Raised by his Aunt Lucy and Uncle Pastuzo, Paddington grew up learning proper traditional manners and hearing stories of London, all told secondhand to his aunt and uncle by an English explorer. With the help of the big-hearted Brown family, who name him after the train station, Paddington sets off to find this explorer in hopes of finding a new place to call home. Paddington 2. Now established in the Brown household with his new human family, Paddington has improved the lives of his entire neighborhood with his presence. With his Aunt Lucy's upcoming birthday, Paddington wants to gift her a one-of-a-kind pop-up book of London's most famous sights. Unfortunately, the book is too expensive for the young bear, and in the process of earning enough money to purchase it, Paddington is framed for larceny and sent to prison. Paddington and his family must prove his innocence and find the real culprit before he loses the loving, peaceful life he has known since coming to London. Both of these stories are extremely predictable. Based on the synopses, you can easily imagine what the story beats and conflicts are in the film and how everything is going to play out. But a unique story isn't really the point of watching Paddington or any other family film. It's about the adventure and your immersion in the whimsical world. The original Paddington strikes the perfect balance of realism and fantasy that gets you right into the world of the movie. The film perfectly pulls you into the world from the start by introducing the story from the human explorer's perspective, establishing the fact that, yes, there are intelligent sentient bears capable of learning human speech, and they love marmalade. So you've been pulled into this world, and you're ready to go on this adventure with Paddington, and the rest of the movie keeps you grounded. The first villain, Millicent Clyde, played by Nicole Kidman, is a realistic, albeit slightly exaggerated villain. Mr. Brown, played by Hugh Bonneville, acts like a parent would if they had to host a complete stranger in their home, and the Brown family is rounded out by the wonderful Mrs. Brown and their two kids who act as a foil for each other. In contrast, Paddington 2 is extremely jarring story-wise. Now, let's be clear. Paddington 2 is a sequel, and as a sequel, it builds off the first film, expecting you to already have seen it. They don't need to do all the same setup as in the original. Yet, our opening scene takes place before the events of the original, showing Uncle Pastuzo, who is presumed dead in the first film, and Aunt Lucy, who barely plays a role in the original and will barely play a role in the sequel. Fast forward a bit and we get the new status quo of Paddington's world, including an evolving family dynamic in which the kids are growing up, Paddington's charming bonds with his neighbors, and a what we've been up to in between films montage that will be relevant in Act 3. Paddington's goal is to buy the expensive pop-up book, so he needs a job. He gets hired, no questions asked, no interview scene, fumbles his first job as a barber, and is promptly fired. He then becomes a freelance window washer, which is fantastic, and I love, by the way. Then we are introduced to the villain, Phoenix Buchanan, played by Hugh Grant. Up until this point, I'm still in on this movie. I've seen the first one, I can suspend my disbelief, but what really took me out of the movie is what comes next. Phoenix Buchanan steals the book, Paddington tries to stop him, and the police get involved. But after the villain disappears into thin air, literally, with zero investigation or any half-decent detective work, Paddington is arrested and immediately put on trial. Okay, now I'm fuming. They present all this evidence against a juvenile bear, and they go straight to conviction? This is a sham judicial system. The book is like half his size. Where did he hide it? The police officers didn't bother searching him? You telling me with all the traffic cameras along the multiple streets they ran down, no one caught a glimpse of the actual thief running away from Paddington? Unbelievable. It's a family film. It doesn't need to make sense. No, that's a cop-out. Don't make excuses for the film. There are an infinite number of ways to write a story and still hit the exact same story beats and plot points, so they definitely could have made it less absurd. The key with these types of films is that you have to have your audience on board to suspend their disbelief, and once they have their seatbelts on, you can go crazy with it. But that was my experience. That was the punch that knocked me out, and I never got back in the ring after that. Still a good film though. Nicole Kidman is the more realistic villain, but Hugh Grant is probably the better villain. So Nicole Kidman plays Millicent Clyde, the daughter of the explorer that taught Paddington's aunt and uncle everything they know about England. It's basically a revenge narrative for her, because her father got kicked out of the Explorers Guild for not bringing the bears back with him from his expedition, and after that she was forced to work at their family petting zoo. Millicent wants to capture Paddington and put him on display at the museum as the crowning achievement of her career, and to get revenge for, or maybe against, her father. She really is a ruthless villain. She's just running all over the place, shooting people with tranquilizers, breaking and entering, using people, the works. All in all, I think Nicole Kidman's character is definitely the more realistic villain in terms of her background and motivation. However, I think Hugh Grant is probably the better villain. Hugh Grant plays Phoenix Buchanan, a failing actor who thinks he can make a comeback through a one-man show. He learns that the pop-up book is actually a treasure map with clues leading to a chest of riches, and that's how he will fund his solo production. Hugh Grant is a fun villain. He basically does the same character as in the recent Dungeons & Dragons movie, but he did it here first. The thing is, he kind of goes off on this treasure hunt on his own, and he doesn't really clash with Paddington directly until the end of the film. Millicent Clyde wants to stuff Paddington, so she hunts him down actively, whereas Phoenix Buchanan is just doing his own thing, and Paddington is the one interfering with his plans. And in the end, Paddington doesn't even need the pop-up book, but things still work out for Phoenix anyway, because he gets to perform his one-man show in prison. This brings me to another point. There's nothing at stake in Paddington 2. In the original, Paddington has lost his home, his family, and he's in a completely unknown place with nowhere to go and no understanding of how this new world works. If he doesn't find a home, or if he doesn't get along with the Brown family, he's going to be on the streets to fend for himself completely alone. There's nothing at stake in the family dynamic in the second Paddington. The Brown family all love Paddington now, even the father. There's no doubt that they are going to support him, even if Paddington worries about it briefly himself. But that only lasts like 2 scenes. The kids are also barely in the second film. They switched gimmicks from the first, so now the son is worried about looking cool and the daughter is starting a newspaper, but they barely do anything in the film. Some new supporting characters are the prisoners Paddington meets while locked up. I really adored all the prison stuff. Just a lovable, innocent bear completely transforming the vibe and culture of the prison is really fun to watch, and the beautification montage is silly in the best way. The prison escape too is obviously unbelievable on purpose, and it just works out for all of them. But the coming together scene at the end of the sequel and the stakes of the film just really don't have as big an emotional impact as the original. In the original, you get a real sense of danger because this completely normal family has to break into a museum, and the dad actually risks his life to climb along the outside of the building. In Paddington 2, there's this whole train sequence, but the human characters are never put in any real danger. 3 of them get tied up immediately, and Paddington does this daring train ladder transfer, except the ladder looks ridiculous, and he's the main character, so you don't believe he's in any danger. Then they crash into the water, and Mrs. Brown jumps off of a bridge to save Paddington, but there's never any indication that either of them are going to drown, so there's no suspense. In the end, everything just works out, just as randomly as it started. Paddington is cleared of his crimes while he's in a coma, his prison buddies are granted freedom for doing a single good deed, and Phoenix Buchanan still gets to perform his one-man show in the same prison that Paddington escaped from. So nothing changed from beginning to end of the second Paddington. No character growth, no health risks or lifestyle alterations, just returning to the same old established at the beginning of the film. I also want to mention the cranky old guy, Mr. Curry, played by Peter Capaldi. This character has a great arc in the first movie, but he serves no purpose in the second except to be annoying. In the original, he's a faux antagonist who doesn't like the presence of Paddington in his neighborhood, so he decides to help Millicent Clyde with her scheme to kidnap him, only to discover her true intentions and inform the Browns where they can rescue Paddington. But in the second, he reverts to his anti-bear propaganda without a second thought or moment of pause. His actions are also pointless to the story because all he really does is fuel the defamation of Paddington's character, which was already in question when Paddington got publicly arrested. So obviously, Mr. Curry's a gag character, and that's something else I want to talk about, the humor. The sequel repeats the same gags and jokes from the first film, but somehow it still had fewer funny moments than the original. I don't recall a single novel joke in Paddington 2. The security guard who's attracted to cross-dressing men comes back, but his bit is less funny than in the original. Paddington makes a mess, but that's also irrelevant to the story. He does a hard stare, and there are marmalade jokes. You get the picture. So what's the point? Ultimately, does it really matter which Paddington is better? Of course not. And I recommend both or either of them to anyone and everyone. Paddington 1 is the far more predictable film, but it made a lot more sense, and that's why I liked it better. But for the average moviegoer, Paddington 2 is a more zany Paddington story with the same humor as the first, and a bit more action. But really, if you're skeptical or just looking for an excuse to rewatch, go for it. I recommend the double screening, because just like Paddington always says, I'll never be like other people. But that's alright, because I'm a bear. Wait, what? Is that the right quote?